Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful.
So, how's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. Cold. Let me do my progressive insurance moment. I'm not going to talk about the dew point, but I am going to talk about the weather again because I don't know. It looks like the rest of the country, it's not just Florida, where we're like weird, very, very cold weather for December. And basically, that's what I've been having to scramble to winterize my porch where I keep a lot of my animals and my birds. It's like, wait a minute, but what is this? And it was like, it's, every once in a while you'll get a cold day or cold couple of days, but this is, I got a freeze warning just about, one of those warnings they send out to everybody in the area. I've gotten a freeze warning every day. And we've come in like really close to freezing at about 33 degrees, almost there. And yeah, I've had to scramble. I had to buy an extra heater, which it's work. And so again, and I told our guest, if you hear any weird noises, it's that I had to like bring in my exotic birds inside until I finish putting up stuff because my porch is very large and it's screened in, so I've got a lot of area to cover to winterize. So in the meantime, I couldn't leave them out there. Even my pigeons came inside. My husband was telling me, yeah, pigeons can take anything, and I go, yeah, but they're my pigeons, so they're coming inside. This so many days, even in the 30s for them. I can't do that. Plus, as a matter of fact, for those that are familiar, these are racing pigeons. These are they're messenger pigeons. They're important. I'm breeding them. So anyway, yeah, yeah, it's kind of like a tight squeeze in the house, especially like in the living room, kitchen area, and they're all happy. That's why they're making all that noise, because they're all happy because they're nice and warm. Yeah. Plus, and then I've got a, and it's like everything, it's like, Marlene, what are you doing? I put like 20 something eggs of guinea eggs in the incubator. They all hatched, and luckily I had a broody hen that I stuck them with, but I have to keep them inside in a cage kind of because it's still even too cold to put them outside. I would have lost the guinea. So yeah, it's like a chaotic little pet thing going on, animal stuff, but hey, what can I say? I wouldn't have it any other way. So, oh, and by the way, the people that asked me, yes, I am going to do the stories for Christmas that I did last year, Spirit of the Season, and then I am going to do the Mardi Gras show. I think this is the fourth year we do the Mardi Gras show. I'm gonna try to do it live with Henry the Wingman. As everybody knows, that's the last hurrah before Lent. So this is gonna be, I think, like I said, the fourth annual Mardi Gras show. I am gonna be doing that. So there you go. So anyway, let me get to the good part. And the good part is, who is the guest? He's been here before. His name is Father Nathan Castle. He is the joyful friar of St. Dominic's Order of Preachers for the Western Dominican Province. He lives a life of prayer, study, community, and service. Catholic means universal welcoming for all. And he follows the Dominican motto of contemplate and give to others the fruits of your contemplation. He offers hope that we are capable of not only surviving our deaths, but thriving in eternity. His ministry specializes in helping people in the afterlife and in this earthly life experience freedom. And later on, we'll go over into his website and I'll put in the links to the show. But believe it or not, Father Nathan can communicate with the other side. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Father Nathan?
I'm doing great. You gave a thorough weather report there, and I'm in Tucson, Arizona, which is my little piece of heaven. It's in the 60s, going to about 74 today.
Well, you know what? Normally that would be the weather over here. Like I said, I sometimes I see these, after going through these things with the hurricanes. I've lived in Florida all my
Yeah.
life, so you always keep an eye on the weather. But this last to hurricanes, it's like, and I try not to watch the weather too much, but they're like Arctic blast, and normally way down in Florida you don't have to worry about Arctic blast, but now it's like okay, yeah. So here we are. Like I said, I got a tight squeeze in the house, but yeah, I know what that's like. That's great weather, by the way. Father Nathan, because I know you were on the show a few years ago, but if you would kind of like give a little bit of information as to how you discovered or what was the event that when you realized that you were able to communicate with those that have passed on or that are stuck here.
Well, there's different ways to answer that. I was raised in a Catholic home where I was taught spiritual practice early on. It wasn't just the rules and regulations of a religion, but I was taught how to talk to my family in heaven uh, and understand that God's all around me and it's not far away. All the holy ones are close. But well in my early 40s, the phenomenon that I've written about in my books began to happen, and that is people began coming to me in the night to show me how they died suddenly and violently, and asking for some help moving on. Um, so uh, what happens is that I receive a dream that is not my own psychobabble. It's the difference between having a dream or receiving a dream. To
Mm-hmm.
me, receiving one is somebody else's content inside my psyche. Before I go to sleep, I bless my unconsciousness before I go into sleep. That's a monastic practice called Compline, where you hand over your spirit to God before you go unconscious, and ask that your consciousness be used for God's purposes even while you're asleep. That's just a standard practice in the monastic life. Anyway, about 30 years ago now, I began to be getting people about once a week who died in a sudden and violent way, who have were not ready for the joys of heaven or whatever you think the big adventure might be after leaving the body, because they just died on a highway or they just got shot or whatever. They
Mm-hmm.
needed some recovery time, some healing, some chance to at least kind of regain their balance.
Right.
And then after they do that, they're ready to move along, and they need. I think of my prayer partners and I as the discharge staff near the door of the clinic. we just we're not the healthcare practitioners. We didn't get them all squared away. We're just helping them get out the door. So that's what we do.
Do you ever get uh, souls that maybe it's not so much that maybe they died unexpectedly? How's this? But there was something that they left unsaid or undone or something. When, like I said, somebody dies unexpectedly and they think they have more time. So this maybe keeps them like I need to tell somebody XYZ. Whatever the XYZ might be, something that they think is so important. Have you ever come across that?
Um, yeah, that happens once in a while. I can remember in my first book, there's a story of a woman who died on a plane, actually, and she was young and had little kids.
Right.
And in the afterlife, when they tried to interest her in her present moment, it's always good to have something to do. It sounds like you have plenty to do. you,
Okay.
you, uh, having nothing to do is not a good feeling. And so they were trying to interest her and after death in something that she might do next. And she was so angry that she died with her children still little. She
Right.
pretty much said, I already had a mission, and it was to raise my children, and that was ripped away from me. So she was just too angry to think about a new mission, at least for a while, until she changed her mind.
And see,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I'm talking about. Something like that you think, my children, especially small children, that they need me. I need to be there. And yeah, I could
Yes.
see where a person, a mom, could feel cheated, like I was supposed to be there to protect them, to bring them up into adulthood. And yeah, you kind of feel like, hey, this was not fair.
Yeah, and sometimes people feel guilty for things that the rest of us would not think they're guilty for.
Mm-hmm.
You ever been around that where people accuse themselves of stuff too harshly, and the
Yes.
rest of us are saying it was just an accident, something like that? She got on the wrong plane,
Right,
so
right. And
she
that
died.
was, for lack of a better word, that was her destiny. How's that? That was her.
Well, it might be, but it also, you get in the car and you can turn right or left,
Oh,
and,
sure, of
and
course.
are you going to blame yourself if you die in an accident, and uh, or be mad at the world or whatever? That's always choice.
Right.
But if we do that, it's good to move through it as quick as you can and try to be in the present moment, even if the present moment's an eternity outside your body. There's still a next moment, and
How
best to
about
be in that one.
anybody that's passed away, either let's say on the operating table they're anesthetized, or they've taken some type of drug where they're like blacked out, and then in that process they pass away. Have you ever had those that are
Yeah,
kind of like a
sometimes
little bit
people die in their
confused?
sleep. I have in my current book. There's a man named Dr. Lawrence. That's his surname. He was a professor,
Mm-hmm.
and he had been good at everything his whole life until he broke a hip, and they
Okay.
explained to him before the surgery, here's how the surgery's going to go, and here's what the recovery will be like. And he never really recovered. All the physical therapy didn't work. He got
Okay.
sicker and sicker, and he finally died in his sleep. And it's funny because you're surrounded by birds in cages right now.
Yes.
He said, I felt like such a caged bird. And he said, and when I died, I took the cage with me.
I see. That's
He
interesting.
died in his sleep, and he woke up into something very much like what he left behind. He woke up into an imagined space in the afterlife that was like a nursing home room,
Mm-hmm.
and they dealt with him for a while and then coached him into seeing it's not really that anymore because you're not in that sick body. But he'd kind of quit putting forth any effort, and you even in the afterlife we still have to live our lives. we
Right. In other
uh,
words, you can't.
you
And how
have to
about
engage and
right, right?
choose.
That. In other words, we're going to give you a little while to kind of like come to grips with it. But
Yeah, and if what you created was the nursing home, well, then they occupy that space, and they started saying to him, "You're going to find that when we do physical therapy with you here, everything is going to work, and you're going to see the results of it right away."
I see.
So he had lost hope. He just thought his life was hopeless, and
Right.
he was defaulting to that in the early part of his afterlife because that's what he'd gotten used to. It created that habit, and he just needed to realize that he didn't need to be that way anymore. And eventually, they said they got me walking to the end of the hall, and then one day I could sit in the solarium and listen to the birds.
Interesting.
And
Because
then they
sometimes
said,
people, I guess, think
they
that when
said,
you die, you get it all of a sudden. Like you, like I get it now, and it sounds like you're still that human part of you where you're still fixated on what you were experiencing. Let's say when you died.
it depends. The population that my prayer partners and I work with are people that died in trauma.
Okay.
He was different in that he died of an illness, but
Mm-hmm.
most of our people die suddenly, and he did not. But in any event, you sort of get what you imagine, and
Sure.
if you imagine that your situation is hopeless, you stay there until you begin to change your mind.
Right. Right. Like
And
they.
there's people that'll help you do it. You don't need to be that way anymore. Remember, and that one thing they try to do is get you remembering happy times. They bring around people from earlier in your life when you were vital and healthy. Um, People that you knew in life who've already died can come and visit and say, "Hey,
Right.
let's
Exactly. Exactly. Like you're not
let's
by
get up and do
yourself, and
something fun."
a friendly
Yeah,
face
you don't
goes a
have to be
long
like
way.
that anymore.
And
Yeah, and then I put it to him. Did you think you were going to go to? He didn't. He wasn't a believer. He didn't have any religious training. He said I was interested in the big questions that religions often deal in about origin. Why are we here? What is this place? Do we have a destiny or a purpose? But he
right.
said I didn't have a conventionally religious training, and so. But he said, I'm here now, and I can see they. One guy came and visited him and said, uh, looked closely at me, and he was looking like he did, maybe in his retirement years.
I see.
And he said, "Watch me." And then he turned 360 degrees and turned into about his 35-year-old self.
Okay.
And he said, "Our bodies can do this, and yours can too. You're just going to have to learn how to do it if you want to. And I'll help you. I'll show you." And they took a stopwatch because he did it once, but it only lasted a very brief time. He said, "Well, the next time you do it, we'll time you and see if you can make it last just a little bit longer." So he got used to being able to be a younger, healthier version of himself.
How about, have you come across or have you had communications from somebody that was an atheist who had, forget the spiritual
Yes,
belief. They was like, for as far as they're concerned, when you're dead, that's it. It's over.
yes, that happens a fair amount. Such people don't always call themselves atheists
Mm-hmm.
because you have to be a little bit interested in theism to even say that you're an atheist.
Right.
You know, but a lot of people just thought when you're dead you're done and that's that, and then they awaken to a next version of themselves and say, "Oh, I guess it was true," and then they keep going. But you don't have to be all religious about it. I don't think that the afterlife is for religious people only.
Right. 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 But these people that in their, because I know there's agnostics which are like, they're like, maybe, yeah, could be, but they kind of leave that possibility open. But I'm talking about these people that like, as far as they're concerned, this is it. Your existence here when you're got a physical body is all you're gonna get, and when you're dead, the you, the consciousness, the spirit, the soul, that's it. There is no such. There's nothing in the afterlife, the heaven, none of that. And I imagine that maybe some of them like are shocked to find that that's not the case. And I
Yeah, and
wonder if
some
some
of
of
them,
them
if they
like,
were very, if they were like physicists or very scientifically minded,
mm-hmm,
they might not move into it with religious categories and God and Jesus and saints and angels and all that, but they'll
right,
be interested in the new physics. You know,
okay,
what is this place and how does it operate and what are its rules? It doesn't have gravity anymore, but it has something like it. I don't have the body I was in before, but I'm in something very like it. So they often want to know, they want to understand the new set of circumstances that they're in. And
oh,
that can be very exciting for people that love to study
oh
because now
sure,
they've got
yes,
things to study that they could never have studied before.
oh yeah, that analytical mind that definitely will hook
Yeah.
them. Because in a way, believe it, I think that what it is, it's a method of convincing themselves. Like if I arrive at that conclusion, then it must be right. That kind of deal. Where somebody else tells them, it's
Yeah,
like,
but then
no, I get it. Yeah.
but even in the scientific method, if for people that are good scientists, they keep exploring unknown things,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes the new information that's coming in um, really supplants a previous understanding of what's true. And
Right.
scientists who are any good at their field have to be ready to change their minds based on new information.
Of course. Of course. Unless there's somebody that's very married to that belief, like they might have even ridiculed people when they were alive that
Yes.
believed in an afterlife, and now they find themselves exactly. People like, most people when they're alive anyway, they don't like to. It's difficult depending on the personality to go against maybe a long held belief.
Yes. Of any
That.
kind. It doesn't have to be a religious one. It can be all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things,
Yes.
certainties. And it's always good to check your certainties from time to time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely, especially when And how about people that have come to you that they've either been murdered and nobody knows, what happened to them, or sometimes every once in a while you'll hear these news stories where they've discovered a car that's been in a lake or some body of water. The person might have disappeared years ago, and their family really never knew what happened to them. Do they ever come to you because they want to like, I need to. I don't want my family to think I abandoned them. How's that?
I've had a few of those where the body was never found, lost at sea, or stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, a boat could go down with 50 people on it, or something like the Titanic, and they wouldn't all experience it the same way because they're all different. They
Mm-hmm.
all have their own imagination and whatever. And some wouldn't care one bit that their body was lost at sea, and others would be annoyed that they don't have a grave, or
Right.
they never got a funeral. Uh, yeah, people can just they're as different in this passage as they are today.
Right, as
And
far as when they were
people,
alive, what mattered to them.
yeah, and how they adapt, and how they interpret events going on in their lives, and then respond to them.
That's
The happier ones are ones who can stay in the present moment and be in the present environment and figure out how to serve. Really, that's a really important thing. How to live in the truth and how to be of service. Those are two things that I've seen over and over again are really important.
how about people that have either been suffering either from mental health problems, like in other words, their grip on reality is not there, or somebody like I said that's a drug user, addiction of different,
Yeah.
and they're and
Well, so
again their
many
grip on
people die
reality
of.
is not good, and then they pass away in that process. What happens with
Yeah,
those?
the ones we're all the ones that come to my prayer partners and me have been vetted and are ready to cross, so they're no longer afflicted that way.
Really?
But
Okay.
they have a recent memory of it and of a recovery. In my current book, there's a woman named Rita. She spelled it with an H, Rita with an H at the end,
Mm-hmm.
who died in homeless. Eventually, she was kind of upper middle class, had a nice professional job until about 6 months before she died. But her addictions just came back and killed her.
Oh.
And eventually, in the afterlife, she said, I went through afterlife rehab. And she said
Okay.
I'd spent my parents' money, wasted it twice on rehabs that didn't work, and she said they always stopped because of insurance.
Right. Right.
They didn't turn you loose because you were healed. They turned you loose because you didn't have any more money.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah. I know,
she
and I
said,
know rehab can be very expensive depending on how long you stay there and stuff like that. Sure.
yeah, and she said, here, I always felt guilty that I was spending somebody else's money, her parents' money.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, here, that's not an issue. And you can stay as long as you like. Everything works. Um, they never guess at what you need because they already know. And I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a Christian, a Catholic priest, and he once referred to himself as the way, the truth, and the life. And
Okay.
I just believe anytime that people work towards the truth, and including understanding the truth of your own existence and why you are the way you are, uh, is uh, that goes in the win column. So anyway, she was in her 40s when she died, and in the end, they helped her to realize that an event that happened when she was a child started it all.
I get it. Oh,
And she
yes.
said it shouldn't have been a surprise. I was 6 when my only sibling, who was my older sister, a year older, was killed on a bicycle,
Oof.
hit by a car. And you would think that would rock anybody's world, but she said what happened was my parents shut down. They were so grief stricken they didn't know what to do,
Mm-hmm.
and they became a shell of themselves. And she said at 6 I realized that I was going to be fed and clothed and housed, but that was it.
Right.
I was I was on my own for everything else. And so at 6 years old, she felt like this isolated cell in the world.
Which is that's the
And
for a 6 year old that must be that's trauma on top of trauma.
well, she didn't realize the importance of it, because people just, you keep going. What else are you going
Mm-hmm.
to do?
Of course.
The day after a tragedy, the sun still comes up, and you've got to go to work, and you've got to,
Yes.
you've got stuff to do. And she said we just went on about our lives as best we knew how. But she said here they helped me to see that there was a hole in my heart that was there from all that time back,
Mm-hmm.
and that it had consequences that moved me into addiction. None of that had to happen that way, but one thing led to another, and that's was the outcome.
Right. And yeah, it was unfortunately it was not just the trauma of her sister, it was the way the family
Yes.
handled it afterwards, which
Yeah,
maybe
and she said back in those days, it was in the early 50s, I think, she said people didn't talk as much about their feelings and
mm-hmm.
emotions, and not everybody went to a therapist, and
Sure.
they just did what they thought people do, but here's how it affected me. And so now when one of the things that happens for us is they're going to move from place to place, from a familiar place in the afterlife to someplace new, and so they need a guide. They're going to go somewhere
Mm-hmm.
they don't know, so they need somebody to show them around and take them over the hill or whatever. And her sister, who had died, showed up for her.
I was about to
But
ask you that.
yeah, except she had died on a bicycle, but this time she came on an all-terrain vehicle,
Oh,
one of
wow.
those three-wheeled things that you. She said we roar around and kick up dust.
Oh,
And she said,
great.
I didn't know my sister that well because she was only 7 and I was only 6. And in those days, girls were never allowed to wear pants.
Yes.
They always had to wear dresses,
Mm-hmm.
and you were taught from really early about keeping your legs together and being prim and all of that. And she said she showed up here on this all-terrain vehicle because she wants me to see that she can roar around and kick up dust. And she said I didn't know her wild side because I didn't know her that well at all, but she wants to show me her wild side, and then we'll go do something fun.
That's incredible. And let me ask you, did she see her sister as an adult, or was she still like what?
Yeah, she was an adult.
She was
Yeah,
an adult. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. That's
hmm
that's that. I was gonna say that's got to have been the ultimate motivator.
But they don't have to do that. They can go back and forth, and they don't have to pick only one age either. They can be in their 40s for a while until they decide they
Mm-hmm.
want to be in their 20s for some reason and float around.
So, do you think that these souls that come to you, they're like they're sent to you? How's this that they're handpicked? In other words, like we're gonna send them over to Father Nathan, you know, or
Well,
is
we
it
asked
random?
that early on. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years, and early on, I used to ask, "How did you find me?" And all I ever heard was pretty much, "I don't know. Somebody brought me here." One time, someone said your light was on. Um, Sometimes their guardian. We do have a guardian angel. Call it whatever you will. I just think guardian angel is the language that I was raised with.
Mm-hmm.
But some people call it guiding spirits or
Okay.
beings of light or whatever. But they stay with the traumatized ones because they still need help.
Right.
Eventually, they can go off duty, and once you're beyond needing any of that kind of help. But the ones that we deal with, because they were traumatized at their death, their guardian still is with them, and their guardian sometimes will say to them, "You're going to need somebody to help you transition from here to the next place. If you'll leave it to me, I'll study it and find a good way." And they've I've been told that they like the way that we do things because we're so methodical and predictable,
Okay.
that we always do things the same way. And they like that because the ones they care for and love have been through trauma and they don't need surprises.
Sure. Of course. Of course. Especially if there's still like that lady Rita that you were talking
Yeah.
about that she had that early trauma, then she fell into addiction, and God knows what might have happened in between those, one year and the other, between childhood and by the time she, fell totally into addiction. Maybe there were other circumstances that deepened that wound. So yeah, she might have been recovering from a lifetime of different types of trauma along the way.
Yeah. And we only, you know how it is with people, you only see the tip of the iceberg of
Sure.
most of the people you know. And
Yes.
our conversations are brief. They're usually less than 40 minutes. So it's not a comprehensive description of every last thing. It's just whatever they felt like they wanted to say. And then before we tell any of their stories in public, we go back one more time
Mm-hmm.
in prayer, what I call protected prayer,
Okay.
to uh, ask if it's okay to use their story. And they usually give us some little update because that's what people do.
Okay. Have you ever come across someone that just doesn't buy it? Is still, for some reason, not ready. They're just like, whatever their mental processes are, their personality, they're just not ready. They're kind of like, for lack of a better word, they're stuck in limbo, but they're just not ready to go
Under
forward.
the very first one that we dealt with like 30 years ago was that way.
Mm-hmm.
He was mad at God because he had been taught that the reason that people die is because God takes them.
Okay.
And he had died in a fire at 20 years old, and he had a baby that was like a year and a half old. And he said, "Who the hell does he think he is taking me just when my life's getting good?"
Okay.
And so he was, he needed uh, some counsel and an opportunity to change his way of thinking.
Okay.
But most of them now, ever since, are they're ready to go. We don't have to convince anybody; they're just
They're
ready to
ready to
go.
go. And I'm going to ask you about this because N- And you know what? Maybe this has always been around, but it seems like in the last few years, there's so many older people suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia,
Hmm.
where they don't recognize even sometimes their own children.
Yes.
When they pass on, are they little by little? I mean, do their memories come back? Their mind?
Yeah,
How's that?
there's probably other ones. You remember, I'm only dealing with ones that need extra help. So there
Mm-hmm.
might be some people that went from dementia into clear-headedness as soon as they left the body and didn't need anything from me.
Right.
I think my dad did that. My dad was in Parkinsonian dementia at the end, and he made it known very soon after his death that he was fine.
Okay.
But everybody can be different, and uh, it has to do with imagination and hope. The imagination is a function of the soul, and it's affected by the deteriorating brain. But people can still potentially be hopeful even if they're in dementia. It
Yes.
just depends on how their illness, plays out. But I've seen some that were in dementia and who had to regain a sense of agency about their life, being in charge of it and being able to do things. And when
Okay.
you can't even do your own personal hygiene and you have to wait for somebody to come and clean you and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
it can wear people down,
Oh yes.
and they just feel like giving up everything. And if they do that, it can be restored, but it's restored at the pace that they're willing to work.
Okay.
One
Yes.
lady, a sweet soul named Wilhelmina, she's in book 2, I think. I have 3. Each of them have 13 stories, so I sometimes have to stop and think which one are they in. She was in the late 50s. Her husband dropped dead in front of her. They were in their retirement, and they were really enjoying their retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Their kids were raised, and they were just. She said, "Our life would have bored anybody but us.
Yeah.
we got up and talked about what we'd have for lunch and what we'd buy at the grocery store." And she said that they were living a sweet life, and she was mending torn clothing at the time that he walked into the room and dropped dead.
Wow.
And the mending became a whole metaphor for what she needed to do in the afterlife. She didn't
Okay.
like mending. She threw all the stuff that needed a button or that needed to be sewed in a basket, and she'd do it about twice a year.
Okay.
And she'd just work her way into it and talk herself into it and say, "Today is going to be mending day, and we're going to have fun." She said, I was sitting in my front room listening to the radio. It reminded me of the South that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
But before television was so big,
Right.
when people listened to the radio a lot more
Yes.
and called their
Yes.
living room the front room, it probably had a screen door that was open.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
um, she was sitting there listening to the radio in her front room mending, and she said, "Nobody needed to know this, but I used to talk to the mending just to make it fun."
Sure.
She'd
Yeah.
say, "You, Mr. Torn Sock, this is your lucky day. Any minute now, you're going to be good as new." And so she'd go on like that, just being silly.
Yeah.
And she said her husband walked into the room and she shouted his name, Eric, and he dropped dead.
Wow.
And she said, as he did that, she said, a part of me did the same thing. And she was numb. And are you familiar with dissociation?
Yes.
She moved out of her primary consciousness and moved into a secondary one and was next to herself. And she
Wow.
she started saying, "What should a woman?" She was overwhelmed that her quiet little house suddenly was full of police and ambulance people and neighbors she didn't know very well. And uh, before long, she felt like all I want to do is make this day start over. But she couldn't. And then she started saying, "What should a woman do when her husband just dropped dead? That woman probably ought to go into his closet and pick out the clothes he'll be laid out in. That woman probably ought to
Right. Like she was
call
into
his old
observer mode.
workplace." She
And
went and she stayed in it. She never went back. She said it was too painful to
mm-hmm.
live the way that she used to. And she said she would go to church. She explained that she picked me out of a catalog. They gave her a catalog and said, you're ready to make a passage and you need somebody to help. And she said, "I used to shop from the J.C. Penney and Sears catalogs."
Right.
And they gave her a catalog and she was paging through it and she turned a page and I was on the page. And she said, "Oh, there's a priest that does this. I was Catholic. I think
Whoa,
I'll pick him."
it's
Can you
great.
imagine that?
Pick a priest. Uh,
Yeah, so she picked me, and then she explained that she would go to church, but people would try to get her to stay for the coffee and donuts, and she'd
hmm
rush home and say that the dog and the cat need her, or she'd go to the grocery store and buy almost nothing, eggs, milk, and bread. And she said, "I never cooked anything anymore, and I never had anybody over." And she became a cranky old lady. She didn't like her grandkids to be around her, and
Yeah,
eventually got sick and put in a nursing home. And she made it known that she wanted the sickest ladies as her roommate. The
right.
ones she didn't want anybody that got visitors, and she wanted people that slept all the time.
Wow, she
She just
totally
created
withdrew.
this world that was, yeah, she just created this world that was really sad.
She did
And
the
then she got to
closest
the other
thing. It
side. And
sounds like she did the closest thing she could, besides physically dying. She tried
yes,
to.
yeah. And then after she did die, she said she was a Christian and a believer, and she hoped it would be. What this is what she said. I hoped it would be glory,
Hmm
whatever that is. But in her imagination, it would all happen from outside of her and not from inside of her.
Right.
She
Sure.
would just be catapulted into some Disneyland or something,
hmm
and she didn't have to do anything. And she got there, and they explained to her, "Well, we'll help you." But she also arrived in a kind of nursing home setting because that's what she had died in,
Right.
and she had quit imagining anything. And so she was in a kind of a nursing home thing, and they would bring her guests, and they would get her to get up and walk around, and try to coax her. And she said they started bringing me uh, girls from my childhood
Okay.
because she had a happy childhood. They were trying to get her to be happy again,
hmm
and her childhood had no sadness in it; it was just happy. So they kept bringing her happy people from happy times, and they kept saying, one of these days, when we stop visiting you, we're going to go for lunch. Next time, or one of these days, you're going to come with us. They tried to get her to imagine that she was capable of getting out of this place and going to lunch.
Of
Uh,
course, this is, yeah, this is like this gradual. I imagine that at some point it has to be like you know what they talk about free will, that
yes,
ultimately it has to be that person or that soul's choice. That people can come around and talk about, but it ultimately you're not going to go anywhere unless that's what you want.
Has anybody ever tried to make you do what you don't want to do?
Of course. Yeah,
Don't you
and it's like,
resist?
yeah, yes, of
That's what
course.
we all do, and we do it
Yeah.
here and hereafter. You have to want, and so, but they can entice, they can tease, and
Mm-hmm.
say, you know, one of these days, we're going to go out to lunch, and we want you to come with us. And they got her thinking about the fact that her helpers, her guardian angel, and her helper team said, we'll go slow because that's all you'll tolerate,
Okay.
but you're in charge. We're going to work on your schedule, and if you want to go slow, we go slow. And they didn't shame her. They just said, here's what it is. We're going to use what you give us. And this is what you're giving us right now. And
Right.
then she began to get annoyed at herself because she thought I wasn't always slow. She wasn't the best student in the class, but she said it depended on the subject. And there were
Right.
times when I could win the ribbon or the certificate. It just depended. And she sort of got annoyed with herself and decided, you know what, I'm not going to be slow all the time. I'm going to pick my spots and I'm going to try harder over here. So she began to get a little bit of steam, and
Right.
uh, eventually she did go for what she really wanted was to be back with her husband,
Oh, of course.
but but it was just too painful. And eventually she was ready, and they said, well, just sit still and imagine uh, the thing that you wish would happen. And then she said, it's Eric, but he's 16-year-old Eric, like he looked when we went on a first date.
Okay.
And he's kind of shy, and he's holding a bouquet of flowers that don't all match because they're not from the store. They're from his mother's yard.
Okay. Right.
And she decided that she would go with him on a first date. That's
Right,
how
which in
she
a way,
got
if you
up and
think
moving.
about it, it's less traumatic because if he would have appeared the way maybe he did when he passed away, that would have immediately bought that most recent event right there. Whereas when she's looking at them when they had their first date, it was like, oh, this is a good memory. This is a really sweet memory.
Yes, yeah, and it was, and she did come back, once to give us permission, and she just said, I don't mind being a object lesson, being uh, a negative example. Don't do it
Mm-hmm.
the way I did. She
Right,
just
right.
said, don't make it harder than it has to be. Uh, if you have to grieve the loss of somebody that you loved, try to endure the pain.
Exactly.
Don't numb yourself to it because it just makes matters worse.
Well, and everybody's different. Let me ask
Yeah,
you, have
everybody's
they?
different, and she said that. She said, but if you want to listen to me,
Right.
here's what
Well,
I
you
have
know
to
what, and
say.
that's like you said, there's people. You'll have siblings that are exposed to trauma, and one handles it a lot better than the other one, and the other one
Yeah.
shuts down while the other one suffers but overcomes it. How's that? And it's just the personality styles that the way they could grasp things.
Well, one of the things I've seen over and over is that people are not shamed if they're not keeping
Mm-hmm.
up. You know how in schooling, a lot of times the teacher's responsible for getting through this chapter or this lesson, and everybody's got to move at the same pace in the
Yes.
room. And some are catching on quickly, and others don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's too bad because we got to go on to the next thing.
Right.
And there are all kind of ways when you're in school to be reminded that you're either in the smart kid reading group or the dumb one. You know,
Right.
next the number of stars next to your name, or who got the academic awards, and she's so one of the things I've seen in the afterlife is that nobody is shamed anymore. If you're going slow, that's okay. Just
Is
keep
is
going.
is time exist there the same as our time, or is time doesn't matter anymore?
I thought of it as being something that would be standard across the board, but it really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Some people pay a lot of attention to it, like the lady whose kids were still little when she died.
Right.
She wanted to be at their ballet class, and she wanted to be at the football game, and they have to learn how to be appropriately present without being creepy. You know,
Yeah. Okay. That's
and
interesting.
it's never good to spend too much time looking back.
Right.
I don't know. Have you ever moved and longed to be where you used to live?
Oh my God. When I'll tell you what, when I moved from South Florida, where I was born and raised for all my life, and I moved up here, even though it's the same state. Yes, I went. I want to say, it took me. It was a process, but it took me about a little bit over 2 years to really. And it's not because I moved against my will. I did want to move, but at the same time, it took me like almost 2 to 3 years to really totally let go. How's that? And a lot of it
Well,
is
there's
the
just a thing,
memories.
you have to. It's important to be in the present moment and live where you are, and you can still, make a phone call or write a letter or something to
Yes,
the old friends. But if you're doing that every day, all day, and you're not meeting anybody new,
of
are
course, of
are you
course.
missing the opportunity to serve around you? And so they have to learn it's okay to show up from time to time for your kids, whether they know it or not. That's a whole other question. All that stuff about leaving pennies or some signal that your song or making the lights flicker, all those kind of things that
Yes,
people can do. Um, there's a little bit of that, but it has to be in balance, and they
right.
can they can learn how to do that, how to be sort of a present to your family, but also fully engaged in what's new around you.
Of course. That I can't. One thing cannot anchor you totally, and then you're just wanting to live in the memories. Um, and
I've moved a lot, and so I had to learn that lesson young.
okay,
That
right, and you like it's one of those things where, especially if it's good memories, of course, where all of a
Yeah.
sudden you want to, and that's why you will see people sometimes hang on to certain clothes or pieces of furniture or
Oh, sure. I've
certain
got all
things
that.
because the memory associated with it. It's not the value of the thing per se. It's the
Well, anyway,
symbol
that's
behind
that's
it.
an important a life skill here and hereafter is to love the one you're with.
Right.
Be in a
Yes.
place and be of service and be grateful for what you've had before.
Yes.
and stay engaged to some appropriate level.
Sure.
You know, I used to say, I have a vow of poverty, but that doesn't mean I'm destitute. I'd still have, some money, and I would usually save it for a plane ticket so I
Right.
could go
Yeah.
back and
Yeah. Of
see my old
course.
friends. But I could only do that for 3 or 4 or 5 days at tops because I had a job. I couldn't just you know
Right. But you know what,
leave my.
Father Nathan, I think that I tell people one of the best things I think is sometimes the anticipation of when you're working towards something like what you just said. Oh, I'm getting the money together and I'm making plans to buy a plane ticket to do what, fill in the blank. I think sometimes the anticipation is, I'm going to use that old 80s saying,
I
it's not the destination, it's the journey kind of deal. But yeah,
It is, but I for much of my work life I had only one day off per week,
oh,
the
yes,
6 day
okay.
work week,
All right.
and and it might be that on your day off you have the 7 a.m. mass the next day, so you really can't do much at night. You've got to be
Right.
uh, so I would work that 6 day work week about 6 weeks in a row, and then I thought of it as monopoly when all the hotels are built.
Uh-huh. Yes. Yes.
When the next roll of the dice could either there's if you could land on Community Chest or the railroad or something,
Uh-huh.
you'd be kind of safe, but otherwise you're screwed if you land on the big expensive thing. I look at my calendar that way, and I would make sure that every 6 weeks there were 2 or 3 days bundled where I could
Right.
uh, get out of it, out of my workaday circumstance, and be with other people.
Of course.
Because in the priesthood, you have very little private life. Your coworkers and your parishioners, they're pretty much all you got,
Of
and
course.
so you can kind of get sucked into whatever the routines and the dramas are, and it's important to step out of it from time to time and remember there's other things going on,
Let me
other
ask you,
things
especially, I imagine, do you get requests for like last minute, somebody with last rites, a request for last rites or something like
Oh
that?
yeah, it used to be that I don't get that very much anymore, but I used to have to wear a pager or keep a pager on the nightstand in case there was an emergency at the hospital.
Okay.
And in fact, that's one of my metaphors for when I get one of these dreams. It feels like in those days when I had to wake up to a pager. Somebody's in distress and needs something, and I have to. I receive the dream and I write it down real quickly because dreams can get away from you pretty fast.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yes, they can. And I'm going to ask you, this is, and I know some people ask about this or wonder about this, the Catholic belief in purgatory. Is there such a
Hmm.
thing as purgatory? Are these souls in purgatory, or what is?
Well, uh, you're trying to describe a mystery, and purge means to cleanse,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one of the metaphors. That I've had people that felt like they died, bloody on the highway,
Mm-hmm.
um, and being getting clean was one of the things they wanted to do.
Okay.
Uh, that's one metaphor for it. One of the ways that purgatory is defined in the Catholic Catechism is to uh, become free of unhelpful attachments. So
Okay.
something like Velcro, you know,
Okay.
or something that you're clinging to that you'd be healthier if you didn't cling to it anymore. That's another metaphor of thinking about it. They're certainly in a process where they need to change and grow and come to truth. So purgatory works, uh,
Okay.
except sometimes people think of it as a punitive place where
Mm-hmm.
it's like a jail where
Right.
you have to stay until you served your time, and that's really not my experience.
Okay.
I haven't seen that. They're not being punished; they're just dealing with actions having consequences, and if they want a different outcome, they need to choose a different way of thinking.
And let me ask concerning that. What happens to people that are really bad people? How's this? And I'm not even going to the extreme of serial killers or murderers or just people that were bad. They just
I pray for them on a regular basis. I have a whole part of my prayer life
do they
where I
do they
pray for
ever
the
bring
ones
you
that
the bad cases, the ones that were like this guy was a real son of a gun, when he was
I can
alive.
remember. One guy, killed his girlfriend's son
Oh,
because they were breaking up.
oh,
She made a, a, an unwise decision of saying, as soon as I get home from work, I'm throwing all your stuff on the lawn.
oh,
But she left him in charge of her 10-year-old
oh.
while she went off to work. And he didn't even mean to do it. He just said, um, "Did you ever did you ever have a moment where you just thought, I could just strangle you?" Well, he
Mm.
said, "Before I knew it, I'd done it." He
Yes.
said it was like out of body. I didn't think I'd
Yes.
ever be somebody that killed somebody, but I did.
Right.
And after he did it, he said, there was nothing to do except make myself easy to be caught. So he
Okay.
didn't go to the police station, but he said, I left a trail of credit card receipts and stuff and just made myself easy to find. And then ended up, imprisoned and died in prison. But he was sorry for what he did,
Right.
and that doesn't mean that he could make it right with everybody because that depends on the other person.
Right.
Uh, but he had done what he needed to do on his end, and he was able to go through the process that we help with.
Right. Because I don't know. I guess whether some people think, like I said, that when you die, you know everything and everything is clear. And I'm thinking, okay, what happens to a person who was, is you'll have people that were bad or sociopaths, but they were kind of like when you look at their family history or their childhood, they kind of were in a way made into a sociopath.
Yes, right. It's
Um,
I just went to see Wicked the other day, and that's the way Wicked begins.
oh,
Why
really?
is anyone wicked? Yeah, that's the question at the beginning of the play and the movie. Why
Okay.
is anyone wicked? A child asked the question in Act One at the beginning of Act One. Why is anybody wicked?
Mm-hmm.
Well, were they born that way, or did something happen?
Right.
And and the thing, and I believe that the Holy Spirit knows everybody's everything,
Right.
knows us 360, and always can take into account things that the rest of us don't understand. Uh, but still, people do have to be responsible for the things that they do and the consequences that they cause. But that can all be handled, one step at a time.
Right.
And I have dealt with a few people like that some would think of were, horrible because they did something horrible.
Do they? And I know that. And you might not even know the answer to this. Do they ever have to? How's this? Whether confront, because this is the way I look at it. Sometimes, let's say when somebody does a horrible act, in that case of that this man killed his child, it's like a ripple effect.
Hmm.
It's just the death of the child. Obviously, you killed a child or any person. It doesn't matter the age, but it's how it affects the mother and maybe anybody in that
Of
surrounding
course.
nucleus around that event. Do they ever understand the ramifications, or do have to confront, like, because of this act or acts that you did, these all these people suffered some way or
Yes,
other?
but they don't have their nose rubbed in it. They just
Okay.
are presented with it as data. They're not shamed. They're just shown here's the information that we'd like you to see. We'd like you to know this is what happened in the lives of these other people because of what you did. But it's presented in a way that's helpful information, so you know the truth, not so you can feel even worse.
Right.
Um,
And I
and
guess my
then, of course, but sometimes people will. Sometimes it's not even volitional. Sometimes it's you could be texting while you're driving and kill people.
right, yes.
And I've known people that did that
Mhm.
in this ministry, and they sometimes want to apologize to the people whose lives they took, and they're often told that's a noble thought. Uh, it's just not timely yet.
Okay.
And so hold that thought. We'll let you know when it's timely. Are you familiar with AA and the 12 steps
Yes.
of Alcoholics Anonymous?
Yes.
When you get to around step 5, you begin to have enough sobriety that you can begin to look at what your addictive behavior did to people around you.
Mhm.
But you
Yes.
do that with a partner. You don't do that on your own. You do that with a sponsor. And the sponsor helps you discern if there are places where you might be able to make positive amends. If you might be able to go to somebody and apologize. But you can't do that if they have a restraining order against you.
Right. Of course. Of course.
You know,
Yeah,
or they
and
or
people
they
don't
don't want to do
realize
it.
that sometimes there's a bad history. Let's say in an addiction situation, where, for lack of a better word, you've burnt your bridges with this person or
Yes,
persons, and it's like,
Yeah, and sometimes in the afterlife, people are just not ready
Yeah.
to be in a conversation with someone whose behavior caused
Yeah.
them such pain. But
And
there
I'm
could
glad.
come a time when they are ready, and that they're told, "We'll let you know when it's timely."
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because I think you point out something very important because I think sometimes people think that immediately everything is kumbaya, especially when you've had a very terrible history, God, with this person or person. You know what I'm saying? That sometimes it's like I don't want to talk to you, or uh, because you know how they say, if you're gonna be sorry, you have to be really sorry, not say I'm sorry, but not really be sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
It's
I try to coach people not to say, "I'll never forgive you."
right,
Uh, I don't think you don't have to predict your own future, and you don't have to determine it in a dark way like that. You can just say, "I can't talk about this now," or "I can't
exactly,
deal with that person, at least not at present."
exactly. That's what I'm saying. That people sometimes think that, or how's this? That they sometimes think that because in some cases, whether it's the victim or whatever, it's not. I don't guess. I don't think it's a quite. It's the same thing as saying, "Oh, it's all good," but deep down inside, it's not all good. I think it's a
No,
process.
and one of the things that I've seen in the afterlife is that there's real transparency.
Mm-hmm.
There's no subplots.
Right.
You don't get to fake anybody out. At
Yes.
least not in the part that I work in. Everybody deals in the truth 24/7.
Okay.
And and if the truth is you're just really still too wounded and hurt
Mm-hmm.
to talk to the person who hurt you,
Right.
that doesn't need to be a moral question. It's just a fact.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be something scored against you. It's just that's the way you are at present. But you don't have
Exactly.
to stay that way forever. And if you want help with moving in a direction towards reconciliation, you can do that, at your own pace.
Absolutely.
And
Exactly.
one
Like
of
you
the things
can't
I've
fake it.
seen is that you can also change your mind.
Sure.
You know, you can start doing a thing and say, no, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. I think I'd rather pause.
Yes.
Then there's always something else you can go on to that's positive too. Then you can revisit that maybe when you're a little stronger.
Yes. Because again, it's you can't pretend that you either feel it or you don't
Yes.
because it's like, and it's all about what's really going on inside of you. Whether I guess you're alive or or dead. It's like, what's the use of saying to somebody, "I forgive you," when maybe you really haven't? That kind of deal. You're not really
Well,
there.
it can be helpful to forgive to your current capacity.
Okay.
I, I want to, and I've had to coach people into if you don't want to forgive, could
Hmm.
you want to forgive?
Ah,
Or
great
could
distinction
you
there.
want to forgive?
Yeah. Okay.
Because
Yeah, that's a great
many,
distinction. Yes.
yeah, because many people they know that they don't want to be a grudge holder, but in fact they are,
Uh huh. Yes.
and they
Absolutely.
don't feel in charge of those painful emotions. And I try to help people say, don't let your grief and anger boss you around because they will if you let them. You know,
That's an excellent
you
point. Yes.
you can give your grief and your anger, uh, put it on the clock. I'll say
Right.
to myself, okay, you can be angry for the next 30 minutes, and sometimes I'll put the timer on my phone on. I say, and at 11:30, we're not doing that anymore
Yeah, that's
because
it.
there
It's
are other
done.
things to think about today besides
Yeah.
that.
Right. Yeah. That's great. That's great. Do you think, or have you had an experience where there is such a thing as a person that has no conscience? In other words, what we think of as a psychopath, somebody that has no remorse. Is there such a thing, even in the afterlife?
I try to stick with the experiences that I've had, and I haven't experienced that, and I wouldn't because a psychopath who hadn't done any change of heart
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be ready for the work that my prayer partners and I do. They would still be self-absorbed and uninterested in other people's
Right, right, right. And
feelings
I
and
always wonder about that. Is like, how do you, about somebody that. And by the way, people sometimes think that when you say the word psychopath, it has to be like the serial killer There's people sometimes that are psychopathic. They don't go around killing people, but they do a lot of harm. Whether by their actions or what it may be some type of authority they had when with what they did for a living, and they just
Yes.
the remorse that normal people feel like a twinge. It's like never there. And I'm thinking,
Oh
how
yeah.
do
Most people have been acquainted with at least one supervisor or boss that was that way, and that
yes,
made a workplace miserable.
yes,
To
for no
you know,
reason.
yeah. Well, they had some sort of reason. It didn't make sense to anybody but them, but they created drama and unhappiness, and
Yes,
um,
exactly. That's my
yeah,
point.
there
That's
would
my
have to be
point.
a yeah, there would have to be some coming to recognition, some willingness to look at the truth. And when people are shown the truth in the afterlife, they're shown uh, positive and negative truths about themselves. It's not just some horror show of
Right.
all of your sins. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you're shown the good impact that you had on people and negative impact you had on people. But then it'd be up to you to make the changes to, you know, play nice.
Right.
But one thing about psychological illnesses is some of them are chemically, biologically oriented. And one thing that can happen for people is that they die, for example, while they're, bipolar,
Mm-hmm.
maybe in an uncontrolled bipolar
Yes.
uh, uh, circumstance. They'll be shown that you don't have that body chemistry any longer. You you no longer have that impulse that was hard to control because that's gone away. You don't have cancer pain anymore because you died of cancer. You left
Right.
behind the body that had that in it. But people still have to create new behaviors. And if they got so used to behaving in a certain way that felt inevitable, they have to begin to learn that no, you don't have to be that way any longer. And here's a different way to be, and we'll help you. You have to sometimes be coached into new behavior.
Right. And I'm going to ask you now that you said bipolar, what about people that do away with themselves, commit suicide, whether due to mental illness or even, and I don't know if you've seen that. To me, I look at that and that's like, man, that's government assisted, suicide, whether it's because they're very ill, they have a terminal disease, like Kevorkian. You remember Dr. Kevorkian, where
Hmm.
I don't know. I see that, and it's like part of me is like, this is wrong, and then I'm thinking, but if this person is in terrible pain, or what happens to people like that? That do they change their mind, or in some cases, the ones that let's say not assisted, whether they
I
do.
haven't dealt with assisted suicides. I've dealt with lots of different kinds of suicides. One of the things I've learned about them is sometimes the decision to take one's life wasn't as clear as that.
Oh,
Sometimes it was more like brinksmanship. You're
okay,
feeling so bad, and you keep taking a little bit more of your drug of choice, and you know that you're coming into a danger level, and you're not really trying to overdose, but
okay,
you do.
yes,
Uh, it's not the same as putting a gun to your head or jumping out the window. The Sometimes it's gradual, it's incremental, and they didn't exactly positively choose that that was the outcome.
right. I know that
And it
some of
might
them, yeah,
and it
they
might
get
even say that on the death certificate.
right. Some of them I know that sometimes they'll put together some drug cocktail and basically it stops their breathing, and
Yeah,
maybe that's what the not what they were aiming for, but it happens. And then, like you said, then
yeah.
there's the ones that they do something that they know there's no way I'm going to survive this. They like purposely. It's intentional. How's that?
Yes, there can be different degrees of intent around it, but what I've seen is they're all greeted with whatever the best combination of resources would be to help them.
Okay. Okay.
And they're one of the things that people have regularly said is they're grateful to be in a place where everything therapeutic works and that there's no guesswork.
Okay.
Nobody hands you a pill and says, "Let's try this for 2 weeks."
Sure. Exactly. Exactly. Which unfortunately I think
Whatever
that
you're, what,
happens too often.
yeah, yeah.
As far as
And they, sometimes church folk and some people seek me out because I'm a priest that are under the impression that Christian churches teach that you commit suicide, you go to hell.
yeah, of course, of
Uh,
course.
and when I'm 68 years old, when I was a child, the Catholic practice in this country was that you couldn't have a Catholic mass and you couldn't be buried in a Catholic cemetery if you
Right.
committed suicide.
Yes.
Well, that changed in the 80s, and I remember getting a prayer book, and I was ordained in 86. When I was 5 years ordained, there was a new prayer book that came out for funerals, and it explicitly included prayers for suicides
Mm-hmm.
at the funeral of someone who committed suicide. So that's changed during my lifetime. That idea, and it used to be based on the idea that thou shalt not kill. It's one of the commandments. It's a mortal sin to kill somebody, and killing yourself qualifies. And so, but eventually that changed, and thanks be to God, it did.
Do you
People,
think it's that the
and that
church
changed from.
understood that a lot of people they were suffering from some type of mental illness when they did something like
Yes,
that?
that they didn't have the clarity of will
Right,
to
right, right.
make a positive decision to do that. And I've
Yes.
seen that again and again. That lots of times people felt, lots of times they felt optionless. I can remember there's in my current book, there's a story of a young woman who falsified data in her PhD thesis
Okay.
and got caught,
All right.
and it ruined her career and her progress toward her PhD. All her life, she had been thought of as the brilliant poster child,
Mm-hmm.
and she just couldn't bear to face anybody uh, with the fact that she cheated academically.
Wow.
She just couldn't see a path forward, and so she took pills.
Wow.
Um, well, uh, but she survived like everybody else did. You know, that's a survivable, and she had to re-examine and say, well, there are lots of ways forward now, and there's lots of ways forward now, even after you've taken your life, because you only killed the part of you that was killable,
Mm-hmm.
not all of you, and so sometimes people just feel like they were out of options,
Right.
and then they're shown, well, you might have felt that way. I remember one person, she's in book two, uh, who her team said, well, we weren't there with you at that time and place, but we are with you in this time and place, and we will help you now. So they didn't feel like they needed to have an opinion about what she should have done earlier. They
Right.
just said, that's really not our business.
And
We're
when
here
we
to help
look
you
at
now.
that's the scenario that you presented. You think, oh, kill yourself over. In other words, this is survivable, and to somebody. And I guess a person in that moment telescopes on this. This is like my life is over. I got caught
Yes.
plagiarizing, and that's it. My future is it doesn't exist. And maybe somebody looking
No
from the
one will
outside
ever
is
want
like,
to hire me in the future because this will always be on my resume. It will follow me to my grave. I may as well
yes.
enter my grave now.
Right. Well, and I'm sure you've seen this latest trend because of the internet and social media. All these young people that they commit suicide because they're ridiculed or stuff, and they think that how's this? They think that everybody in the world will see this forever and ever, and it's almost like, and I know when you're a teenager, you kind of tend to do this, where it's the end all be all
Yes.
moment, where you think, you know what, an hour from now, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, nobody will remember this or remember
Well,
you.
and even if what you think is true, there could be people that 20 years from now look back and find that stuff and want to throw it in your face.
Yes.
Um, but many of us have something in our past that we hope doesn't come to light,
Sure.
and can be compassionate for somebody when unflattering things do come to light.
Right.
And rather than mock them or laugh at them, we just think, too bad.
Right. Well, no, and
uh,
and that's why I'm saying when you see these young people that they do it with themselves over, and how's this? I don't mean to say that in that moment to them it is like my life is not worth living kind of mentality. Even though who knows there might be a flavor of mental illness somewhere, but it's like, and you feel like telling them, you know what? If you could just fast forward a couple of years, you'll realize that this moment is insignificant in the totality of your life. Yeah, it might come to haunt you, but maybe not. Maybe nobody.
well, I've just seen that life goes on even for people that committed suicide, and they're not shamed. And one woman in book two, her name is Dee. She was a big band singer, like do you remember Lawrence Welk?
Yes, of course. My grandparents used to
Can
watch Lawrence Welk all the time.
can you imagine that, all those guys playing clarinets and horns and stuff, and then there's one woman in the front doing all the singing?
Yes.
She's in book two. Her name is Dee, and the boys in the band, they discovered her when she was 18. They pulled her off the farm, brought her into this world of entertainment. They
Mm-hmm.
traveled on trains to shows in the 30s, late 30s, early 40s, and and they it started by housing her in boarding houses with some matronly woman
Okay.
kind of chaperoning, and then eventually they just gave her a room in their hotel and they kept a key, and they would just go and have their way with her. And then she had never had a boyfriend or had sex
Oh my
until
God.
she was, and she didn't use the word rape because she thought that was for strangers.
Oh.
She thought rape was something where you were walking in alley or something and some stranger accosted you. She
Mm-hmm.
didn't think that because she knew them and because it happened regularly that it qualified as rape.
Wow.
And she felt kind of conflicted because she just tried to pretend it wasn't happening.
Yes.
And she said, if I let them do what they wanted, they'd leave faster, and I could clean myself up and go to sleep. And
That's
that was
terrible.
what she was doing at 18 to try to deal with this, or 19, whatever it was. And eventually, she got pregnant, and she couldn't know by whom. And she had changed her last name, and her father was offended. And anyway, she just didn't see a way forward. And so she I asked her, do you ever use the word suicide to describe what you did? And she said, no, what I did is I took matters into my own hands.
That's a good way of looking at it if you think about it. Yeah.
That was her way of looking at it. I
Yeah.
took matters into my own. And she said she didn't want to work with me if she would be involved in any kind of religious shaming. And
Wow.
I said, I didn't become a priest so I could shame people.
Right,
I'm
right,
not the
right. But
least
I could see, where
interested
somebody's
in
gonna be
shaming
like,
you.
"Oh, you're gonna shake your finger at me and tell me all this
Well, I
thing."
just told her, somebody brought you to me, and they because they thought I was trustworthy, and I will not shame you. I promise. It would never enter in my mind to do that. So anyway, we helped her uh, move along.
Wow.
She
And
had
what? Let me ask you
a
something. According to her, what did she do? How did did she take pills or?
hers was she used a gun, and she said she shot herself in the torso rather than in the head
Mm-hmm.
because she said she didn't want to leave her family with the grief of her being a suicide.
Okay.
She said I wanted to try to do it in a way that made it ambiguous and men covered for each other.
You know
I
what?
figured
And I
they'd
was gonna
create.
say because normally women don't use guns. It's not a woman thing,
Well,
but I could see her reasoning
she
when you just explained that.
she said I shot myself in the chest so that they could make up a story that I was cleaning the gun and it went off or something like that. So,
Wow.
and she said that's exactly what happened. My death was not considered a suicide; it was an accidental death, and she wanted to spare her family the tragedy of losing her to suicide. So,
That's,
but
I could
that's what
absolutely
she
see
said.
that where she's thinking, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to try to save face for my family and mitigate the pain as much as I can, kind of deal.
That's what she was doing, even at the time. So that was some kind of a twisted kindness, even in the moment of doing that. I'm trying to. So anyway, she ended up moving along and having
Hmm.
a good time.
I'm glad to hear that. Father Nathan, it has been wonderful to speak to you again. I know that you have a book out. Are you working on anything now? Anything that's going to be coming out?
I have I have four books total. And Toto 2, The Wizard of Oz's Spiritual Adventure was my first, and I've just been doing some retreats on that because Wicked is so much in the popular mind now.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love the whole Oz story, and I just think of it as a spiritual journey. And then I've got three books that are called Afterlife Interrupted, books 1, 2, and 3. The current one, book 3, is the subtitle is Please Let Me Explain.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because sometimes in the course of the conversations that we have with people, like the one I was just talking about, Dee, she did a great job of explaining the predicament she was in, um,
Right.
and why she did what she did. And so anyway, I have all of those. And then I'm doing some in-person retreats. I just got back from Branson, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
You know Branson, that entertainment town in Missouri?
Believe it or not, no.
Uh, well, it's a place that has a lot of like Vegas acts, except they're
I
mostly
didn't know
country
that.
western and they're kind of homespun. It's in Southwest Missouri, kind of near Springfield, and
Okay.
it's only 10,000 people, but it's very well known. There's all kind of
I did
stage
not know
acts
that.
and stuff, and so I was just there. And I'm doing a retreat in Tucson that any of your listeners, if they felt like being a part of it, it's at the end of January and beginning of February over a weekend at
Okay,
a little
can they go
retreat
to your
center here in
website? What's
Tucson.
your website that for
Yeah,
my
yeah,
podcast listeners?
nathan-castle.com, nathan-castle.com. I'm
Okay,
doing a retreat called, what's that one? Changed, Not Ended, Continuing to Love Those Who Have Died.
great.
So using tools that are part of the Catholic Christian toolkit
Mm-hmm.
on staying connected with people because we do believe that they still are alive.
Right, and I
And
think I want to say that maybe not when it's an older person or maybe somebody's a disease, but I think the living always worries so much, and count myself in that. You worry about the ones that have passed on. Like, are they going to be okay? Is everything okay for
well,
them? Um,
well, I grew up in a way where my grandmother lived next door and was a mystic, and she talked to the saints all the time, like they were in the room because they are in the room.
okay.
And so, uh, how to engage the because I'm a Christian, the Christian saints, and befriend them. How to befriend people who have died that you might assist in their in their purgatory, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can also ask for their help. My grandmother used to say, "There's a big library in heaven, and when you need to know something, you just ask for the right book."
Well, that's interesting when you think about it because um, again, most people, especially if it's something unexpected or it was, I think that the people that are left behind always want to have that assurance. Like, my God, is this person going to be okay? And I'm going to ask you something real quick. And I don't know, have you heard about this young man that he's supposed to be the first millennial saint, Carlo Acutis?
Yes, yeah, I pray to him regularly for
I
getting my
never heard
printer
of
to
him.
work.
I was like, who? Who's this guy? And I didn't
Yeah,
know anything about him.
yeah, he died when he was 15. He was an Italian, and
Right.
he was like the first internet. He's not a saint yet, but he's in the process.
Okay.
But he was very interested in what Catholics call Eucharistic miracles,
Mm-hmm.
miracles that happen around the body and blood of Christ at Mass or whatever. He just then that happens all through history. He created a website uh,
Okay.
for this, and he was very eager to tell all his friends about these miracles and stuff. He got leukemia and died at 15, but he's being promoted as the patron saint of the internet.
Okay.
So yeah, I call on him when I can't get some tech to work. Hey, Carlos, get over here and help me. Why the damn printer is right over there, and the computer can't find it.
When
It's
I
right
heard
over
of him, I
there.
was like, I guess I'm caught up with old time saints where all of a sudden you're like, the who? The what? The millennial saint? Who's that? I was like,
Well, he's not a saint yet. I think
no, I know
he's
he's.
called a blessed. He's a blessed, but he's on his way to becoming a saint. And yeah, I pray to Carlo, but mostly I pray when I need something. I haven't really been very reciprocal. I haven't been helping him with anything. I pretty much just go to him when I need the printer to work or
That's
something
interesting.
like that.
Well, see, there you go. At least, the church is moving along towards, more modern stuff. Because, and let me ask you real quick: has he had any miracles attributed to him yet, or no?
I'm not sure, but you know what I would say to you?
What?
Google it.
I
Go
know,
online.
I know.
There's
You know what?
probably
The only
you
reason
ask
why
that.
sometimes I ask is that I hate to say it, but sometimes there's a lot of misinformation out there that's not exactly accurate, and you're looking at it, it's
You
like,
mean if it's on the internet, it isn't true? Is that what you're trying to
oh
tell
my
me?
God, yeah. Oh, ooh, yes, of course not. No, never. Everything out there is absolutely accurate and truthful. No, I know.
Yeah.
Again, Father Nathan, it has been wonderful, and I think this is one of the most interesting talk about the afterlife. And I know that a lot of people that are going to listen to it that have questions or concerns about people in their lives that have passed on. It kind of soothes the wound. If it was
Well,
something,
if I can help any of your listeners, I'd be happy to. But I do have one little standard.
yes,
Please read at least one of my books before you ask me a question,
that's a very
because
easy standard to that.
because I've, in a podcast, even this one, we've talked for an hour and a half, which is a good block of time. But
Mm-hmm.
still, you're always kind of rushing or you have to kind
Yes,
of give the soundbite answers.
right.
And in the books, I can explain things in a slower way. And so if people want to have a conversation, I ask that they've read at least one book before we do that.
That's very fair. Absolutely fair. Again, Father Nathan, thank you so much and have a good day.
All right. God bless you, dear. Bye bye.
Likewise, thank you. What do you think? Let me tell you something. I like that. I really like that. I really like. I mean, we had talked. I want to say like 3 years ago. 3 years ago, yeah. And we talked, and he had told me that that story about his. He didn't have all the books out yet. I think he only had one book out. Anyway, he did tell me that story about one of the first dreams encounters that he had, where this young man had a really weird, kind of horrific type of accident where he burned up, something blew up, and he died. And he kind of had like a rough upbringing, and finally he had just gotten married and had a little baby. In other words, like when you're going through difficult moments and then you finally get to the place where you're thinking, okay, I'm good now. I've got somebody who loves me. I've got a little kid, and I'm young. So in other words, here you are, ready to make plans and move forward. And then so he was telling me that that was one of the first incidents that he had, that where part of what was going on with this young man was like what he was describing, where this is not fair, or how did this happen, or that whole thing, like it's not fair. It's not fair that this should happen. I'm happy and I have a child. I can think of one of the things that, or like what he was saying, the other lady that died in a plane crash. I'm sorry, and she has children, because I cannot think of anything that could worry a parent, as in, if you have young children, you don't want to leave your young child, especially under any circumstance. That's dreadful, but unexpectedly, all right, where that parental love, obligation, responsibility, that my child will be better off if I'm there looking after them, and you can't. I think that's such a powerful, what's the word I'm looking for, like motivation of, like, or I don't know, that would be the nexus of that feeling of it's not fair. I need to go back. You know, I have a baby, I have little kids, I have children that need me. You know, and I want to say, besides the grief, let's say, to that parent, it's the concern you have of what will happen to my child. Besides the hurt feelings, and you lose a parent, is like, I was planning on taking care of them, school, stages of life, all those things. I tell everybody, my kids are full grown. And in prior shows, you'll see one of my kids like calls me that, I call it the impeccable timing. It's like, do you all know somehow, like when I'm doing a show, that it's like you need to call me? And like I said, even for my kids, they're all adults. I have an emergency bypass, so even if I silence my phone, their calls will come through. I'll hear it. And you might say, pray tell, Marlene, why would you need to do that with your adult children? Because even adult children and grandchildren always have emergencies, because according to them, but no. Yes, sometimes they call me for stuff that's like, what? And then other times I always worry, which is what I'm talking about. What if something happens, or something they need to get a hold of me, and it's a true emergency? I always keep that in mind. Yeah, among all these calls about mom, and it's like, really? Um, that I'll get a call that it's like they need to speak to me right away about something. That's something really, really important, or a real emergency. So, of course, that goes without saying. So I'm saying that, coming from my own personal experience as a parent, as a mom, I could see where somebody in the afterlife would be like, this is not what I planned. This is not fair. I need to be able to fulfill this thing I had of being a parent. And see, and if you don't have children, then you have little dogs that insist on being part of. Okay, hold on, Stripey, my girl. Oh my God, I'm telling you. Okay, Stripe, wait a minute. And then this is the thing. There's this special spot. There's a sweet spot that exists where they like this, where they crawl behind my back, and there's a cushion back there, and they sit on the cushion and see, and it's like whoever gets up there first. So she's back there, and they're just all happy. That's what she wants. She wants to sit behind my back, and then I can kind of lean a little bit her, and it's like warm, and she's on top of the cushion, and yeah, does wonders for my back. Not, but anyway, again, this show with Father Nathan, like I said, especially when we hear about these stories about ghosts and people that are trapped and everything, that it makes you. And that's even why I asked him, like, what about people that didn't believe in the afterlife? I really, really thought, or that they were just real pieces of work, to put it nicely. And maybe during their life they never thought of the health thing, or nothing's gonna happen, or when I'm dead it's over. And then come to find out, we that's not the case. Like, what happens to them? So when you hear his version of what goes on, even for people like that who were not, I want to call them non-believers, or non-believers who turn into believers, but the part they believe in is the part where, man, I know I did so many things that were really horrible, that I know I'm going to the hot place, so I'm going to stick around here, or for a host of other reasons. Sometimes guilt is a powerful emotion, people. Guilt is, and by this, because there's a lot of people that say, well, somebody's trying to lay a guilt trip on me. Sometimes you don't need. How's this? Somebody tries to lay the guilt trip on you, and the fact that they're trying to lay it on you, you're like, yeah, forget it. No, you're not going to manipulate me. But then there's guilt that you get on your own. That kind of deal. That's the kind of guilt. The one that is like, nobody's trying to give me this story and this sob story. I know that what I did was wrong, or whatever. And people, that guilt, and by this, again, everybody's different. Some people feel guilt, it has to be something mighty bad. And then other people, because of their personality, it doesn't really have to be that bad. That you even look at it and you go, you're guilty about that? That's not that bad. But to them and their world, when I mean their world, their head space, it is. It is. Depending on their personality, depending on their upbringing, dependent on what they were told. That example that he gave of that girl, she'd been caught plagiarizing, and to her, this was the end all be all of her existence. Literally, this was the end all be all of her existence. Whereas we would look at it and we would go like, well, that's not good, but no, not to kill yourself over it, right? Like, that you're never going to be able to overcome it, or that, how's this, that their self-worth is caught up in this thing that they've seen of themselves. Like, if I couldn't, besides the fact that I was busted for plagiarizing, but if that I cannot continue in this idea, whether it's a PhD or whatever, then my worth is gone. Poop, it just went. I got busted, and there goes my self worth. In totality, in totality, I'm not worth even living, because I don't see where I'm worth anything beyond this. I can't see myself doing. And part of you could say, well, disappointment. Yeah. Again, my point being that what to some people is like, not that's not bad, or oh, okay, but certain personalities, this is an event, is the existential make or break point for them. And why? Because their perception is their reality. Everybody's different. Everybody's different. The to some people they're like, oh well, too bad. Okay, next. And then other people, that moment is insurmountable, insurmountable. And when I asked them that thing, you see all these young people that they're ashamed, or they've been videotaped. You even see it with some sexual encounters where they've been. Well, I'll take it back. Some of them secretly have been videotaped, others knowingly, but they believe that the person doing the taping will never release it. Okay. Until things go south in the relationship or they were being used all along. And then, and how can I say it? It can be very damaging and God knows very embarrassing. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know what? There comes a point where nobody remembers or cares because we live in such a constant treadmill of information and images and even news headlines. It's like that thing is always whirling, and like today, it's something, and then beyond that, it's like it's gone. Nobody remembers. Nobody cares because, of course, everybody's too important. Going, ah, oh yeah, do I look? You know that they don't have time to look at your stuff. They're too caught up looking at themselves, or filming themselves, or one of those deals. That you might think because, like I was saying, that you're telescoping, some of these people or teenagers that they think it's me and forever and ever. Everybody will remember this moment that I got caught doing something I shouldn't have, or being bullied. Sometimes I hate to say it, and that it's a forever thing. Like they're going to the bad signal, or they're going to be streaming this on the side of a New York building for the next 50 years, and it's like nope, that ain't gonna happen. Nobody's gonna remember it, and nobody's gonna care except you. So it's one of those things, like almost like you got to grit your teeth and go through it. But unfortunately, especially when we're young, we don't have that wisdom. We really don't have that wisdom. We think that this embarrassment or the stigma will is forever there. Like the scarlet letter. I'll walk and they'll go, "It's you. Aren't you the girl, the boy, or the guy that was no, it doesn't work that way. Things like that. So it's I don't know. I guess there has to be also a love of life present in you, that you're well anchored to this life. Sometimes, yeah, you might be well anchored. You have an accident, things happen, but that unless it's a circumstance like that where you're involved in whether a disease or some type of traumatic incident, you're anchored to this life. I want to live this life for myself, for those around me, for because there's stuff about this life that I really, really like whatever makes you happy, whatever you get that dopamine rush in your brain because hey, I've just hatched a new bird or something. Everybody's different. To some people it's like, hey, I just did this thing, I saw this, I sold this, I acquired this, or it's those small things, those moments of happiness. Because, like I've said before, I'm not saying everybody you walk around going, ha ha ha, I'm so happy. It's like, okay, but like there's just a certain contentment that feeling allows you to overcome the difficult moments that you have in your that you are aware that you have the experience and a memory of good times, of good things. That life isn't always a piece of what, which by the way that holds even when people have childhood trauma. When you have somebody that has had a happy childhood, even if later in life they encounter very difficult, really difficult moments, they still have this memory, these good memories to fall back on, of like, I know what it's like to be happy. I know that life is not always sucky. I know I can get beyond this. But when you don't have that to fall back on, where your earliest experience and memories are that life is difficult and hard and people don't like you, or God hates you because all these things are being visited. When that's your experience of life, believe me, and then as you grow older, bad things seem to pursue you, because that's how you're going to feel about it. Then the attachment to life is becomes thinner and thinner. It's more fragile. Whereas when you have that happy moments, you're like, no, this is bad now. And by the way, I'm not saying people, like, when you're going through something traumatic or difficult, that you just logic it that easily, but it's happening in the background, that you realize this is bad now, but I can get beyond this. There's life that is good. There are things that are good. I can be happy again. Hope. Hope. That trite thing, hope springs eternal. Yes, hope, the spring eternal without hope. Because what hope does is hope gives you purpose. And we are all creatures of purpose. If we don't have a purpose, that's not good. We all need some type of purpose, whatever it is, that pushes us forward until we pass away. Whatever it is, whether it's bringing up your children, farming, planting, God, whatever, day trading. There's something that needs to drive us, even even like people, even let's say even as people get older, that you think, well, what's there left to do? You already there's still, you need purpose, you need things to. I'll give you an example. Right, for a couple of months, it's gonna be like 2 months. I joined. I'm part of a search and rescue team out where I'm at, and you know, and I like that. I really, really like that because part of it is you want to give back somehow. All right, and especially in scenarios like that where, oh God knows these last two examples of these two hurricanes that you know came down in Milton and that other one, Helene. That you realize that sometimes that is when people are the most in need, even if it's a momentary thing. But yeah, so yeah, there's always a purpose. We all need purpose in life, and but there's different ways of doing that, of serving others somehow or other, even if it's not direct contact. All right, and I'm going to give you a perfect example. There's what they call these web sleuths that work on the Doe network, and they look at these cold cases of of people, human remains that have been found that are unidentified, and some of these people really work behind the scenes in an armchair, is what I'm saying, on the internet, to try to match up and identify the remains. And in some cases, they have been very, very successful in solving cold cases that are 30, 40, 50 years old because of they start looking at missing persons report from that time period, and they once they narrow it down, they can even get DNA matches or things of that nature. So I'm saying there's a purpose. There's a niche for everybody. It doesn't have to be whatever your comfort zone is, but I think all human beings, till they push up the daisies. But the only way you're going to do that is if you have some love for life in some context. Some part of you still feels that while I'm here, I need to give back in some way. Whatever it is. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be monumental. It doesn't have to be, like, oh, it's just through your actions, or inactions, or. But at the end of the day, it's all of us. You know, it extends beyond the individual to family, to towns, to cities. The collective gets bigger and bigger. You might think, well, I'm just one person. Well, who cares? What effect am I going to have? Whoopie doo. You'd be surprised because I think it's, what do you call it? Something that accumulates. And I'm not talking about paying it forward. I'm just saying that, like I was telling Father Nathan, the ripple effect of when something bad occurs, that sometimes the effects, the bad effects, go beyond just the victim and maybe the immediate family. There's people outside of that which are very badly affected. I think it also works the same way with good things. When you do something of service, beyond what you could immediately see as a result, that there's like a ripple effect beyond that you might not ever become aware of. And then that in and of itself, when a bunch of people start, everybody, even though there's no connection between them or they never communicate, that when you start getting all these people even doing little things that are positive and good and helpful, and it's good for everybody. It's like, how's this, a positive wave? And I know that kind of sounds metaphysical and stuff, but it is. It is. It's it's a lot better, I guarantee you, than somebody that's there that's sitting there going, I hate this, and the person, and and all they do is they're unhappy, and they wallow in their unhappiness with themselves, with their neighbor, with their family, with their house, with their everything for them is like, yeah, okay, it's like, all right, you need to like chill out. And you think, God, if you used all that energy that you use to expend on being unhappy and bitching and criticizing, and if you kind of like used it in the other direction, wouldn't that be great? But again, that's just the way I look at it. So anyway, I hope you like this interview with Father Nathan Castle. I will have a link to his website on the credits of the show. He has his books, and I think that's a very fair deal, that you should at least read one of his books prior to contacting him. Very fair. And you might find this is, I want to read the rest of the books. And I've got a lot of great guests coming on for Stories of the Supernatural. Like I said, I have some guests that have been here before. I have brand new ones. Go to mppellicer.com, miamigos.chronicles.com. Again, I have links for everything, the video versions of everything, whether it's on YouTube or Cloud Hub, Rumble, BitChute, Steemit. There's always a podcast version of all the videos, and I have links on the website to everything for each season, for each year. And of course, you can find me on all the podcast platforms. I'm everywhere: Apple, Spotify, you name it, I'm there. Just look for MP Pellicer, Stories of the Supernatural, and you're gonna find us. So again, please sign up for my newsletter on Substack, and wherever it is that you find us, please subscribe to us so that you get notified of when a new show comes up. And that way, also, once you're subscribed, you can go back if you want to listen to older shows. They're archived on these websites. You can go back and listen to older shows, as like just for example, this interview with Father Nathan. You can go back, listen to the original interview I did with him, which, by the way, it's how's this? It's not dated. It's not like something you go, wow, that's like if you're listening to current news and it's like, well, that's doesn't matter. No, this is the information that he presents. I can tell you, it's different. It's the same but different. Like you could listen to the first interview and you could listen to this one, and it's great. It would be like a continuation. So again, if you subscribe to wherever you find us, you can go back into archives. Which if you don't find it there, you can come to my website, because I have archives of everything, everything. So again, guys, please come back, spend some more time with us. But in the meantime, I will see you next week, and you are all wonderful. Take care.